So I want to talk about Anne Frank and Roger Water and comparisons. So I have a cat, and Frank had a cat. She went into hiding. She had to give up her cat. And also, there were so many laws passed in Holland and all Nazi-occupied countries where Jews were not allowed to keep pets. They were also not allowed to go to school. They were not allowed to work. They were not allowed to use public transportation. They were not allowed to work. They were fired from their jobs. They were not allowed. They had to bike. They couldn't use tramways. And you can imagine what that would be, what's like when you live in a large city. And eventually they were rounded off and sent to concentration camps. So let's compare that to the Palestinian reporter who was shot. First of all, she chose to be there. Nobody put her there. Anne Frank didn't choose to hide. She hid because her family hid because all the borders were closed. They weren't allowed. They couldn't go anywhere. Nazis were occupying Nazi Germany occupied all of Europe. There was nowhere to almost all of Europe or all of Europe. They had nowhere to go. They couldn't go to the land of Israel because it wasn't a state. So when Roger Waters is against the Jewish state, the one Jewish state, he's absolutely anti-Semitic because that's the only place my mother could have gone to. Otherwise, it was concentration camp for her. That was the choice. You go to Israel because her grandmother was already there, so she could get a certificate. Most Jews couldn't go there. Very, 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 very few Jews can go to Israel at the time. The British were occupying it. Thank you, Roger Waters, and they didn't allow Jews to go there. Jews didn't have anywhere to go. That's why Anne Frank had to hide. And the cats, she had to give up the cats. There was another cat hiding at the time. I don't know what happened to him, but all the people that she was hiding with were captured and sent to concentration camps. And almost all of them, except I think her father and one other, they were the only ones who managed to survive. She died of a disease because of the poor conditions there. And when you compare to the journalist, she's American passport. She had a right to travel wherever she wanted. She chose to cover the refugee camps. I am definitely not making the Palestinian problem insignificant, but I really don't think there is a place to compare. We also can't forget that the leader of the Palestinians, the Mufti of Jerusalem, he was a friend of the Nazis. He invited Adolf Hitler, and he absolutely was supporting Nazi Germany and the final solution of Jews. He did not want Jews coming to Israel. And the reason he didn't want them is because of anti-Semitism. He was an anti-Semite. And Roger Waters, I don't care what the German courts say, if you behave like an anti-Semite, if you speak against the one Jewish state and compare things that you can't compare, you are anti-Semites, in my opinion. And I think what he's getting away with in Germany is absolutely unbelievable. And you could see that the Germans obviously didn't change. I don't know who is in the audience, but and the radio I hear it's Itzhak Perlman. I would much rather go to watch a concert by Isaac Perlman than Roger Waters. That's a comparison that is very odd, but a very talented man that overcame a disability and is one of the most amazing musicians I've ever heard. And another one is a man who is using provocation to get attention and is a fool. There's only a fool could compare those two things. There are so many cases of abuse of people, and I'm not saying the Palestinian problem is not a problem, but it definitely is different than the Holocaust. And we have to also remember history and the way the Arabs that lived in Israel prevented Jews from escaping from Europe to Israel. And actually the Nazi propaganda slogan, maybe if he was really an intelligent person, was Jews go to Palestine. That's exactly the slogan of the Nazis. So that's what they did, and that's not good either. The Israeli left-wing writer Amos Oz they said, go to Palestine, and then they say, get out of Palestine. Whatever you do, the world gives Jews a mixed message. Whatever the Jews do, they can't win. They didn't want the Jews in Germany. They didn't want them in all of the Nazi-occupied countries. And the fact that people were willing to sit in the audience, Mercedes-Benz audience, and watch this and not protest shows you that Germany didn't really change. Because let's say not everybody that sat there were Germans, but let's say a great deal of them were probably people who reside in Berlin. And it's how many years have passed since the Holocaust, right? And people still sit and watch an anti-Semitic propaganda event against Jews using the memory of Anne Frank, to get back at the Jews for abusing Palestinians. So I'm not saying it's perfect, picture perfect, but I think it's really wrong to do what he did, because it's completely different matter. The Mideast conflict is completely different than the Holocaust. And also the unfortunate death of the Palestinian American journalist is very different than the death of this Jewish girl who was one of many children, 1.5 million children, Jewish children who were murdered, concentration camps. So I'm sorry, but you can compare it. And the comments show so much ignorance. Problem is that people are really not educated about what Israel is all about. The fact that Israel is the only Jewish state and the only place Israel is the home for the majority of the Holocaust survivors. And there are still hundreds of thousands. I don't want to give you the wrong number, but there's about roughly 300,000 Holocaust survivors still living in Israel. And Israel is attacking those people. Not to mention the descendants of Holocaust survivors, people who escaped the Holocaust, their children, the grandchildren are still under danger of being murdered just because they're Jews by certain Palestinian groups. And I stress certain Palestinian groups. What Rogers does is he has a sweeping generalization of a whole country, which is made up of people with so many different political opinions. And he doesn't really understand the Mideast conflict if he compares the two events. They are very different. And it's just very childish to take every event that happened in the world, in world history, and compare it. Well, why don't we compare Vietnam to the Palestinian situation? Why don't we compare? Because when you're ignorant and you don't understand the roots of a historical event, then everything seems to match. When you're stupid, then everything matches. And to put on a Nazi uniform in Berlin with all the connotations, it's just, I'm surprised that the Jewish community there doesn't stand and scream. It's such an outrage. But that's what he wants. He wants attention, because if his music was good enough, he wouldn't need provocations. And if he was smart and educated about history, he wouldn't hate. He wouldn't hate the state of Israel. He wouldn't hate Zionism, because he would understand that thanks to Zionism, a lot of Jews were saved, because that was the only option they had of where to go. And it's not just the Holocaust, it's pogroms, and it's threats on the lives of Jews, whether in the Middle East, whether in Arab lands, or whether in European lands. It doesn't know anything about Judaism. It doesn't know anything about the history of Judaism. It doesn't know anything about the history of anti-Semitism. And it's really sad that he has such a huge stage, and that people even show up for his stupid, provocative, racist, anti-Semitic performances. The fact that he denies it doesn't mean that it's not true. If you look like a Nazi, you act like a Nazi, and you speak like a Nazi, you're a Nazi in my book. And to call Israeli soldiers who are fighting to protect a tiny piece of land that is the homeland for the majority of the Jewish population is disgusting. And it's also not good for the Palestinian cause, because a lot of people, like me, we want peace with the Palestinians. We want to live together, and we do live together, by the way. We do live together, Arabs and Jews. The problem is politicians. That's the problem, I feel. And also just being able to resolve the differences. But we have more in common than we have differences, and we definitely have more in common with Arabs than we have with Europeans. Okay.